Okay, Chapter 8, Popular Culture, Media Masculinity. Fortunately, well, let's not use that word, fortunately. Matter-of-factly, this chapter is shorter, which is nice for me because I've placed the camera in the garden to spice up the view a little bit. But I don't really have a good place to sit, so luckily I don't have to sit too long while I read. Anyways, Chapter 8. Hopefully you can hear me from over here. Mass media do the work of continually indoctrinating boys and men, teaching them the rules of patriarchal thinking and practice. One of the primary reasons the feminists demand that we will challenge and change patriarchy had so little impact on males was that the theory was primarily expressed in books. Most men were not buying or reading feminist books. During the peak moments of white female-led contemporary feminist movement, the late 60s and early 70s, male authors contributed books that took on the issues of destructive masculinity, critiquing patriarchy. Books such as The Male Machine, Men's Liberation, The Liberated Man, The Limits of Masculinity, For Men Against Sexism, Being a Man, and White Hero, Black Beast challenged male passive acceptance of stereotyped sex roles. These books and the discussions they generated had nowhere near the impact on male consciousness that feminist books focused on womanhood were having on female consciousness. For the most part, these white male writers did not strive to reconceptualize masculinity. Instead, they encouraged men to learn behavior patterns previously associated with females. They all agreed that economic changes, coupled with changes in the status of women, had produced a crisis in masculinity. Within modern advanced capitalist society, masculine power was traditionally seen as synonymous with the ability of males to provide financially. However, as more and more women have gained access to the work sphere, the sphere of provision, this centrally defining attribute of patriarchal masculinity has lost significance. Gender equality in the workforce freed lots of men to speak their truth that they were not necessarily interested in the role of provider. Many men were happy with the idea that feminism was teaching women that they should pay their own way. Concurrently, a feminist movement and the so-called sexual revolution changed the notion that sexual action and initiation were exclusively the province of males. Another signifier of patriarchal masculinity lost meaning. Gender-based changes in the workforce and in sexual politics meant that sex roles were modified for a vast majority of people, especially females. Yet even so, patriarchal notions of masculinity remained intact, even when those notions did not have a reality base. Hence the crisis in masculinity. A traditional institutionalized patriarchal social order was being challenged and changed even as there were no major changes in sexist thinking. Men experiencing this crisis could either cling for security and safety to the underlying assumptions of patriarchal ideology, or they could ally themselves with feminist efforts and struggle to create new conceptions of masculinity, new possibilities for the social transformation of male identity. The men who chose change, who dared to ally themselves with feminist movement, were often gay or bisexual, or in heterosexual relationships with radical feminist women. Many women in these relationships found that the men in their lives lost interest in transforming masculinity after the initial feminist fervor subsided. Mainstream mass media, particularly movies and television, reflected the contradictions even as they continued to reinforce patriarchal thinking and action. Most men chose not to change, and conservative mass media supported their staying in place. Men's continued allegiance to a notion of masculinity that could no longer be fully realized on the old terms led them to place greater emphasis on their ability to dominate and control by physical force and abusive psychological terrorism. Compelled to work in a public arena where men no longer asserted patriarchal control, job supervisors and higher-ranking bosses might be female, These men could fully enact rituals of patriarchal domination only in the private sphere. As a consequence, despite feminist changes in the area of work, incidences of male violence against women and children were escalating. Mass media, especially television talk shows, focused on male violence without linking that focus to ending patriarchy. Male domination of women simply became a new form of mass entertainment, hence the money-making spectacle of the O.J. Simpson trial. In social relationships with other men outside the sphere of work, men were more compelled than ever to enact rituals of domination. Among black males, black-on-black homicide fast became the leading cause of death for males between the ages of 16 and 45. In the world of television, shows directed at children never stop their sexist myth-making. One of the most popular children's shows with a subtext about masculinity was The Incredible Hulk, a favorite of boys from diverse class and racial backgrounds. This show was instrumental in teaching the notion that for a male, the exertion of physical force, brutal and monstrous, was a viable response to all situations of crisis. When a sociologist asked young male viewers what they would do if they had the power of the Hulk, they said they would smash their mommies. The Hulk was a precursor for the Power Ranger toys that are still popular, along with more recent video games which allow boys to engage in violent ritualized play. The hero of the Incredible Hulk, like many television and movie heroes that have come in his wake, is a perfect candidate for inclusion in Barbara Einrich's book, The Hearts of Men, American Dreams and the Flight from Commitment. He is a man always on the run, unable to develop lasting ties or intimacy, a scientist by training, the ultimate personification of a rational man. When he expresses anger, he turns into a creature of color and commits violent acts. After committing violence, he changes back to his normal white male rational self. He has no memory of his actions and therefore cannot assume responsibility for them. Since he is, like the hero of a popular adult drama, The Fugitive, unable to form sustained emotional bonds with friends or family, he cannot love. He thrives on disconnection and disassociation. Like the men of the Beat generation, like the more recent men of Generation X, he is a symbol of the ultimate patriarchal man, alone, on the road, forever drifting, driven by the beast within. The Incredible Hulk linked sexism and racism. The cool, level-headed, rational white male scientist turned into a colored beast whenever his passions were aroused. Tormented by the knowledge of this transformation, he searches for a cure, a way to disassociate himself from the beast within. Writing about the connection between racism and the construction of masculinity in White Hero Black Beast, Paul Hawke contends, there is indeed a close interaction between the predominant Western conception of manhood and that of racial and species domination. The notion, originally from a myth and fable, is that the summit of masculinity, the quote-unquote white hero, achieves his manhood first and foremost by winning victory over the quote-unquote dark beast, or over the barbarian beast of other, in some cases, darker races, nations, and social caste, unquote. Recent movies like Men in Black, Independence Day, and The Matrix rely on these racialized narratives of dark versus light to valorize patriarchal white masculinity in a realm of fantasy. In our actual lives, the imperialist white supremacist policies of our government lead to enactments of rituals of white male violent domination of a darker universe, as in both the Gulf War and the most recent war against Iraq. By making it appear that the threatening masculinity, the rapist, the terrorist, the murderer, is really a dark other, white male patriarchs are able to deflect attention away from their own misogyny, from their violence against women and children. The popularization of gangster rap, spearheaded by white male executives in the music industry, gave a public voice to patriarchy and women-hating. However, by promoting the voices of young black males, in the beginning many of whom were coming from the underclass, ruling class white males could both exploit their clients' longing for the trappings of patriarchal masculinity, money, power, sex, and simultaneously make their anti-feminist messages the lessons that young white males would learn. Just as the conservative white men who control our government use individual black males, for example, Colin Powell, to preach the gospel of war to the American public, affirming the idea that the darker other is a threat that the heroic white male must annihilate, Mass media demonization of black males as the epitome of brutal patriarchal masculinity deflects attention away from the patriarchal masculinity of white men and its concomitant woman hating. Concomitant. One of the ways patriarchal white males used mass media to wage a war against feminism was to consistently portray the violent woman-hating man as aberrant and abnormal. A perfect example of the lengths to which patriarchal white men will go to deny their patriarchal violence is offered in the PBS documentary about the Hillside Strangler. Viewers are able to watch psychiatrists talk with a white male serial killer who murdered adult women and 2 girls. It is a tale told in parts, each part highly dramatic and suspenseful. Viewers learn that the accused is a handsome, all-American white boy. I use the word boy because the commentators refer again and again to his boyish qualities, with a lovely blonde wife and a baby son. We are told that he does not have the appearance of a villain, a killer. We learn that he is hardworking, well-liked, etc. All these qualities made detectives and police, all white and male, reluctant to arrest him. He seemed to be an quote-unquote unlikely suspect. Even after his arrest, white male mental health care professionals were brought on the case to at least provide documentation that if this all-American white male did commit all of these violent crimes against females, he did so because he was insane. Finally, a shrewd doctor uncovers that the accused has been pretending to be insane to escape punishment. It seems he studied psychology before he committed his crimes, so he would know how to appear crazy. When the doctor finally, quote-unquote, unmasked him, the Hillside Strangler states, quote, "A woman is nothing to me. I can kill her in a minute," end quote. As the trial closes and the white male judge reads his final comments on the case, he tells viewers the Hillside Strangler was a misogynist, a man who hated women. Yet the judge does not link this misogyny to patriarchy or sexism or male domination. Instead, we are told that the man's mother whipped him to express her anger toward a violent, no-good gambler husband. In the final analysis, a woman is blamed for this man's violence against women. Another case of, quote, "she made me do it," end quote. Nothing is said of his rationally thought-out strategy of dissimulation or of the way he deceived many women and other people by pretending to be a nice guy, by impersonating the benevolent patriarch. Since contemporary feminist movement, the genre of the mystery novel has exploited such feminist issues as domestic violence, rape, and incest to create male villains who are misogynist. Novels from Jagged Edge to the more recent The Analysand exploit feminist themes even as they uphold the need for patriarchal violence. In a real world where more than 90% of violent crimes are committed by men, it is not surprising that popular culture offers both negative and positive models of the masculine. Women-hating dominator men are consistently depicted as loners who may have been abused as children and were not able to adjust in normal society. Ironically, these quote-unquote bad men share the same characteristics as the quote-unquote good men who hunt them down and slaughter them. In both cases, the men dissimulate, take on various appearances and disguises to manipulate others' perception of their identity, and they lack the ability to connect emotionally with others. In contemporary films such as Good Will Hunting, the sensitive man is shown to have a violent undercurrent. In the movie, Will is a working-class young adult who has the opportunity to become a healthy male if he can confront his traumatic childhood and learn to feel again. He is a cinematic portrait of a man in patriarchal culture trying to reclaim connections. Terrence Real writes about the film, "As Will Hunting shows us, a man cannot connect with others and remain cut off from his own heart. Intimacy generates too many raw feelings. Contending with them is a requisite work for staying close. Yet the stoicism of disconnection, the strategy of avoiding one's feelings, is precisely the value in which boys are schooled. Empathy to oneself and others lies in a realm that has remained devalued and unexplored, the domain of women. both the root of Will's pain and also his entitlement to run from it, inflicting it instead on those he most cares for, lie at the heart of patriarchy, the masculine code to which all boys are inducted." End quote. This patriarchal code is passed down through generations. The award-winning film Monsters Ball depicts 3 generations of white men. The ruling patriarch, who's a victim of hard living, drinking, and smoking, his obedient patriarchal son, who works as a prison warden, and the 3rd generation, the grandson, who is following in the footsteps of his elders. To realize patriarchal masculine ideal, these white men must learn to disconnect from their feelings. The ruling patriarch addresses his son with verbal abuse, telling him that, quote, "Your mother wasn't shit," end quote. Shaming is the way he maintains control. Racist and misogynist, he is blindly followed by his son until that moment when the grandson, who is deemed weak because he is anti-racist and able to feel, confronts his fathers. The boy asks why the father does not love him and then shoots himself in the mouth. His suicide brings an end to the patriarchal cycle and leads to the transformation of his dad, who seeks redemption among the black people he has previously hated. No other contemporary film exposes the evil of patriarchy as masterfully as Monsters Ball. The path to redemption requires a repudiation of white male patriarchal rule. Yet, as in many of the films that portray men resisting patriarchy, in the end, the shift is merely a move from violent dominator patriarch to benevolent nice guy patriarch. Contemporary books and movies offer clear portraits of the evils of patriarchy without offering any direction for change. Ultimately, they send the message that male survival demands holding on to some vestige of patriarchy. In Monsters Ball, the male who is really different, who is humanistic, feeling, anti-racist, and loving and longing to move past patriarchal pornographic objectification to genuine intimacy, is a victim. He kills himself. Watching this film, no male will be inspired to truly challenge the system. In another film, Igby Goes Down, the father, who is in touch with his feelings, is schizophrenic. When he shares feelings of being unable to bear the weight of patriarchal responsibility with his son, Igby cannot make an emotional connection. Driven by his hatred for his mother, Igby embraces the cruelty of those of the world around him and only escapes being violent by choosing to become a fugitive, a man on the run in search of a self he cannot find. The vast majority of contemporary films send the message that males cannot escape the beast within. They can pretend, they can dissimulate, but they can never break patriarchy's hold on their consciousness. Until we can create a popular culture that affirms and celebrates masculinity without upholding patriarchy, we will never see a change in the way that masses of males think about the nature of their identity. In Good Will Hunting, when faced with the possibility of knowing love, Will must make a choice. He must let go of his feelings of worthlessness and shame engendered by his traumatic past. He must choose life over death. His choice to love, to live, is to break with the patriarchal model that liberates his spirit. As viewers, we celebrate his new awareness of his essential goodness, his redemption. His recovery gives us hope. Mass media are a powerful vehicle for teaching the art of the possible. Enlightened men must claim it as a space of their public voice and create a progressive popular culture that will teach men how to connect with others, how to communicate, how to love. That is the end of chapter 8. Chapter 9 is Healing Male Spirit. And I think there's 11 chapters. Let me just confer with this book that's in my hand real quick. Yep. Chapter 9 is Healing Male Spirit. Chapter 10, Reclaiming Male Integrity. And Chapter 11, Loving Men. And then we're done. Thanks so much. Under 20 minutes. Chapter 8, Popular Culture, Media Masculinity. 9 pages. But media, big consuming part of our life. So lots to talk about. Mass media do the work of continually indoctrinating boys and men, teaching them the rules of patriarchal thinking and practice. It's like as everybody knows and maybe admits to themselves or not, that the messaging and constant reminding of repercussions of anti or non-patriarchal masculinity types of behavior always coming through mass media, alternative media, books, movies, commercials, radio, all types of media and advertisement that we consume almost without awareness of it. Most men are not buying feminist books. We are buying them and reading them together. Not these ones that sound kind of weird. The Limits of Masculinity, Men's Liberation. I'm not really into that type of language, and I think that thing has passed, except for like the right-wing version of those, like, I don't even want to talk about those guys. Relinquish loss. Oh, so a feminist movement and so-called sexual revolution changed the notion that sexual action and initiation were exclusively the province of males. Another signifier of patriarchal masculinity lost meaning. There's more and more calls for dismantling, confronting, smashing, relinquishing patriarchal power. And I think that sounds very abstract or offensive to people sometimes. But I really think that has to do with being challenged to change your life and accept some responsibility. But I think that like relinquishing power is accurate, but I also think it's accurate to say that you're going to lose some habits and privileges. But another way to look at it is just that you are going to have to evolve and share some stuff and take a different type of seat than the seat you're used to taking. And I think that's like relinquishing like institutional unearned power, but like gaining personal, emotional, communal power, which is not domination based and sounds way better and more fulfilling. Or they could ally themselves with feminist efforts to struggle to create new conceptions of masculinity, new possibilities for a social formation of male identity. They were usually bisexual, heterosexual relationships with feminist, radical feminist women. Mass media, television shows, talk shows focus on male violence. Male domination of women simply became a new form of mass entertainment. I don't really have that much to say about that, actually. She talks about the world of television and kids shows, and I would just like to, there's just like a ton. I think that like what's crazy about this chapter is like social media was not like a thing at the time that this was put out. So obviously the influx of YouTube channels and alternative media and whatever TikTok is, there's just like an endless amount of information for people to plug into. So the same things about feminist men not buying books or whatever doesn't hold the same ground, because you don't have to actually do shit to get this type of information. It just takes a desire and moving your finger around on a screen to get all that information. Just like a personal thing, she's talking about these Incredible Hulk, the color attached to the violent rage and the whiteness attached to the rational thinker. She likes to talk shit about Incredible Hulk. He's a man always on the run, unable to develop lasting ties on intimacy. It's just a tenuous connection. It's like, oh, okay, that pattern exists in my life, but I really don't know how intentional that is and how just like circumstantial or whatever. But knowing that whether or not it's intentional or not is a pattern and has allowed me to skip on developing lasting ties or intimacy in a lot of my relationships or pop in and out of them, that just means that I have to do a better job of not letting that happen. Checking in with people more, visiting people more, being more present, using social media and FaceTime and all that type of stuff to not be a man on the run. I should talk about Generation X. Obviously, we'll probably be talking more about millennials at this time, which I think that, as I said before, have progressed in terms of maybe not like aligning with the feminist movement, but like having to be more aware. And yeah, just like my experience in early childhood education too is just like tenderness being more applauded for young men, for boys, and more acceptable for them. I mean, obviously, the harshness of some patriarchal men still exist, but I think there's a shift. Then she starts to talk shit about the Matrix and rap, giving examples, and she talks about that Harrison Ford movie. So I don't know, I just think that like thinking of current alternative examples, because a lot of this shit like that the Hillside documentary, you know, we see how that same thing is like giving, humanizing. She's just, you know, aware and calling out this stuff before I think it became more mainstream accepted that like, oh, we always go out of our way to humanize Dylan Roof and other like psychotic mass murderers, taking them to get fast food or whatever, and giving them this boy narrative. What was that shit? Like those athletes who are traveling internationally and like, oh, just boys being boys or whatever. But then if you're a man of color, particularly a black man doing that same type of stuff, you're at 12 or younger, you begin to be categorized as a man in order for people to criminalize you in a more harsh way. So I just think it's really gross that the psychology that people allow themselves to be a part of to automatically humanize white men, even to the point when they're mass murderer killers, and not figuring out a path to be able to see Tamir Rice as a human being in the same or same and different type of way. I think that's like a cop thing. We learned that he's hardworking, well-liked, etc. All these qualities made detective and police, all white, all male, reluctant to arrest him. Like when white cops who are cops, but you know, mostly white cops who are, you know, I don't think it's a stretch to say going to be patriarchal men, probably have a harder time arresting a reflection of themselves, especially carrying white supremacist ideologies in their brains in a way that they treat white men as a way, instead of shooting, as opposed to shooting black men in the back. Or, you know, I don't need to go through all the different ways that happens, but it's a psychology that is grotesque, but also not, there's no but about it, but for people who aren't cops but might have cops in their head, it's like unlearning those behaviors. And sometimes people think that they don't know how to get out of being racist, or don't know what to do about it because it's too big. And it's really, I think, to start to mark those things and to sit and reflect and to do something about it. I just posted this thing on Facebook, and it was like all these different, one of the links was about different ways to be more empathetic. And it's just like talking to motherfucking people, getting involved in shit, taking a back seat when you're involved. It's like very like, just like basic respect things. This is just, and I also just about like linking things, like the judge was like, oh, he's a misogynist, but he doesn't relate it or link it to patriarchy, which in the end allows them to blame the mom because she was abusive towards him. In a real world where 90% of violent crimes are committed by men, it's not surprising that pop culture offers both negative and positive models of the masculine. This should be taking me less time. In both cases, the men dissimulate and they lack the ability to connect emotionally with others. And then she goes into the goodwill thing. That movie, so popular because it like does, she likes the movie and this Monsters Ball movie because there's an arc in it of confronting patriarchy and coming out on the other side of it to some extent. But also it's just like this representation that, I mean, I really liked that movie when I first saw it too, but I can't imagine how different it might have been to have movies like that promoted and produced and all the other stuff. Well, I can't imagine because Moonlight might be an example of that. And just the profound effect that when the media normalizes your experience, even in anti-patriarchal ways, those are tools and access that aren't provided and accessible to all communities. So when people have a hard time thinking about like how they're privileged and why is it unfair or we're all treated equal, it's those kind of like seemingly innocuous things that exist all the time that people don't even fucking pay attention to, but are always in the background informing our ideas about ourselves and who is human and who is not and who deserves to not be murdered by police and who does. It's interesting to me that she's talking about him being anti-racist. I've never seen that Monsters Ball, but maybe we should watch movies together and then we can talk about it together. Oh, good. Almost done. No male will be inspired to truly change the system because the guy kills himself and the other guy is schizophrenic. Mass media are a powerful vehicle for teaching the art of the possible. Enlightened men must claim it as a space of their public voice and create a progressive popular culture that will teach men how to connect with others, how to communicate, how to love. I don't know. I always talk about Moonlight. And my brain, I don't know. I feel like even like listen to like sports podcasts, as long as you're not listening to like the reactionary fucking shock jock guys, there's even just a narrative in sports about expanding masculinity. I mean, I feel like even just conversations about like mental health that you'll hear within like the NBA or whatever. But then there's this whole non-professional basketball, the undercommons of basketball that I have read about, actually, if you want to read about it. But there's just all this stuff, I think, that has always been happening, just not as documented, but there's always a playfulness involved in basketball and sports that is like flirtatious between men, even if it's purely in a playful way or if not, whatever. But I did like the time and physicalness, the time like around each other, the nature of being able to see things on the court and then leaving them on the court when you go off. All those types of things I think let masculinity be not interrogated like on the basketball court. So I don't know what other people have for examples, or how to use mass media, examples in mass media about how to connect with others, how to communicate, and how to love. I'll try to think, I guess, of some movies. I mean, like Netflix and shit. Like, I've just been watching Pose a lot lately. which obviously has different types of relationships on display. What are some other good ones? I don't know. I'm sure there's other good ones on Netflix and Hulu. That Normal People, I don't know if that does. Anyways, I'm just rambling now. So if you think of some good mass media examples or want to watch one or whatever, then you can post them in the comments. Thank you very much.